For over 3,000 years, the Nile gave life to one of the most enduring civilizations in human history. Ancient Egypt, land of pharaohs and pyramids, gods and gold, stood as a beacon of power, mystery, and culture. Its legacy shaped the ancient world, and echoes of its glory still reach us today. But what if those echoes were a symphony? What if Egypt never declined? What if it remained not just a memory, but a force? In our timeline, Egypt fell, first to foreign dynasties, then to empire after empire, Persian, Greek, Roman, Arab. Its temples faded, its language forgotten, its gods abandoned. But in this alternate timeline, something changes. Egypt resists the invaders. It unites earlier, reforms faster, and expands farther. It masters trade, harnesses science, and transforms from a river kingdom into a continental empire. And it endures. A world shaped not by Rome or Christendom, not by Mecca or Britannia, but by the will of the pharaohs and the wisdom of the scribes. A world where the Ankh remains the symbol of life and of power. This is the story of what might have been if ancient Egypt remained dominant. Our story begins with a man history nearly forgot, Sekemre Kutawi Kamudi. In our timeline, he was little more than a footnote. But in this world, he becomes a savior. A prince of Thebes, born into a fractured land, he sees the rising tide of foreign invaders, the Hyksos, as not just a threat, but an opportunity. With brilliant timing and ruthless vision, Kamudi rallies the fractured southern nomes, uniting them under a banner not just of defense, but of rebirth. Faced with an enemy wielding superior technology, chariots, composite bows, and organized cavalry, Kamudi does the unthinkable. He adapts. Captured Hyksos weapons are studied, dismantled, and reproduced. Local craftsmen improve upon them. Within 2 years, Egyptian forces field their own chariot corps, drawn by Nubian horses and manned by an elite warrior class loyal to the king. The Nile, long the great highway of Egypt, now shares that role with dust-choked warpaths that stretch beyond the delta. In 1647 BCE, the decisive moment comes. At the Battle of Avaris, Kamudi's forces encircle a Hyksos army twice their size. His chariots strike like lightning from the desert's edge, and his infantry, trained in new formations, break through the city's defenders. The Hyksos are routed. Word spreads like wildfire. Egypt is rising again, and this time it is not content to merely survive. Thebes becomes the nucleus of a renewed Egypt, but Kamudi's vision doesn't stop at the Nile. To the south, emissaries travel deep into Nubia, forging a powerful alliance with the kingdom of Kerma. Ties of marriage, trade, and military cooperation bind the two nations. Nubian archers, long feared for their skill, now fight under the Egyptian banner. In the Levant, city-states weary of Hyksos domination send tribute to the new Egyptian court. Byblos and Ugarit, ancient centers of commerce, pledge fealty not out of fear, but hope. Egypt, for the first time, is becoming a stabilizing power in the eastern Mediterranean, a kingdom with the reach of an empire. At home, Kamudi understands that unity requires more than war. He elevates the god Amun to preeminence, casting himself as Amun's chosen son. Yet he does not suppress the old gods. Instead, he folds them into a grander vision, one pantheon, many faces, all under the eye of Pharaoh. Religion, once regional and fractured, becomes a tool of empire, binding north to south, city to city, people to power. By the end of the decade, the Hyksos have been driven into exile. Their strongholds are razed or absorbed. The city of Avaris is reborn as Per Heka, the House of Power, a fortified symbol of Egypt's new order. Kamudi is no longer just king of the Nile. He is pharaoh of a people who now look east, across the Sinai, toward the lands of Canaan, the shores of Phoenicia and beyond. Egypt stands united, reformed, ambitious, and, for the first time in its long and storied history, it prepares to conquer. With the Hyksos rooted and the delta reclaimed, Egypt stands at a crossroads. For centuries, the desert and sea had defined the limits of its ambition. Now, Pharaoh Kamudi the Conqueror, as he comes to be known, sees no such limits. He looks east, toward Canaan, toward the lands that once gave rise to the Hyksos themselves. He intends not just to punish the invaders, but to bring those lands into the Egyptian fold. His armies, newly hardened by years of reform and civil war, crossed the Sinai by 1638 BCE. No longer a collection of militias and levy troops, Egypt now fields a professionalized fighting force, charioteers, bronze-armed spearmen, Nubian archers, and a growing corps of engineers. Their banners bear the twin crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, but now also the image of a falcon clutching the thunderbolt, a new symbol of Pharaoh's wrath. The Canaanite city-states, long divided and plagued by the remnants of Hyksos warbands, offer little resistance. Cities like Ashkelon, Gaza, and Megiddo sue for peace quickly. Those that resist are swiftly besieged. Many fall without a fight once the scale of Egypt's new military might becomes clear. Rather than raise them, Kamudi installs client kings, drawn from loyal local elites or Egyptian governors. The result is a chain of vassal states stretching from Gaza to Tyre. Egyptian influence spreads faster than its armies. With conquest comes bureaucracy. Scribes trained in the temple schools of Thebes are dispatched eastward to collect tribute, map roads, and organize trade. A new script, a hybrid of Egyptian, hieratic, and Canaanite symbols, begins to emerge to ease communication across the empire. It is a small innovation now, but in time it will help birth a writing system far more accessible and portable than the hieroglyphs etched in stone. Trade flourishes under the Pax Aegyptica. Timber from the forests of Lebanon, tin and copper from Anatolia, and incense from Arabia now flow into Egyptian ports in the Delta and Red Sea. The Nile is no longer Egypt's only artery. The sea lanes are open, and Egyptian ships begin to learn their currents and winds. Meanwhile, Kamudi solidifies his control through spectacle and religion. He commissions a vast new temple complex at Ugarit, what we now call Thebes, dedicated not only to Amun, but to himself, as the living embodiment of divine order. Reliefs on the temple walls do not just record history, they declare it. They depict a unified world under Ma'at, the Egyptian concept of balance and justice, with Pharaoh at its center. But the campaign has costs. Garrisons must be maintained, roads must be built, tribute must be collected. Already, tensions rise between traditional priests and newly empowered military officials. The balance between divine kingship and bureaucratic empire is delicate. Kamudi, aging now, must prepare a successor who can rule not just Egypt, but an empire. By 1630 BCE, the Egyptian sphere of influence stretches from the third cataract of the Nile in the south to the cedar forests of Lebanon in the north. The pharaoh's cartouche is etched onto boundary stones near Ugarit, and his name is spoken with reverence, or fear, in dozens of languages. Egypt has passed from isolation into dominance, and the world is beginning to change around it. By 1630 BCE, Egypt has grown beyond anything even its priesthood could have imagined. Once a kingdom defined by its river, it now presides over vast stretches of desert, mountain, and sea. The pharaoh's reach extends not only across Canaan, but as far north as the borders of Hatti and the inland trading routes of Mesopotamia. But expansion is never the end of a story, only the beginning of a new set of trials. At the heart of this new empire, Pharaoh Kamudi, now entering the twilight of his reign, faces a choice that will define the future. He cannot rule forever. In a court increasingly divided between old priestly elites and ambitious military commanders, succession is a dangerous affair. To secure stability, Kamudi declares a co-regency with his son, Jedkonsu, a general raised in the crucible of the Eastern campaigns. Jedkonsu represents a new generation of Egyptian leadership, one born to war, educated in foreign diplomacy, and fluent in the languages of both Nubia and Canaan. He begins a new policy of imperial standardization. Roads are straightened and paved. Local weights and measures are aligned with Egyptian ones. Law courts are established in major cities, staffed by Egyptian judges working alongside native scribes. For the first time in history, the concept of imperial citizenship emerges, a status conferring tax advantages and protection to loyal subjects from foreign lands. Yet these advances bring tension. Canaanite nobility chafe under bureaucratic oversight. Egyptian soldiers begin to settle in newly built outposts, intermarrying with local women and reshaping local customs. Religion, too, becomes a field of quiet resistance. Temples to Baal, Asherah, and Anat are tolerated, but only under strict oversight by inspectors from Wasit. Priests are required to recognize the supremacy of Amun and the divine pharaoh in their rites. Meanwhile, in the south, Nubian governors express concern about their place in the new order. While once allies, the Nubians now see more Egyptian scribes than diplomats, and more tax demands than partnership. Jedkonsu travels personally to Kerma in 1626 BCE, reaffirming the alliance and offering royal titles and temple grants to Nubian leaders. The move secures peace, but reveals a deeper truth. Empire requires constant maintenance. Beyond the empire's borders, Egypt's rise has not gone unnoticed. The Hittites to the north begin fortifying their southern frontier. Merchant kings in Cyprus and Crete, intrigued by Egypt's dominance of the Levant, seek trade but also hedge their bets. Egyptian emissaries arrive in Knossos and Enkomi bearing gifts, but also subtle messages: align with the Nile or be swallowed by it. At home, cultural transformation accelerates. The Egyptian language adopts foreign loanwords at a rapid pace, especially in trade and diplomacy. Art begins to show new forms. Canaanite motifs blend with traditional reliefs, and Nubian musicians and dancers become staples at court. A hybrid identity is forming, Egyptian at its core, but imperial in style. By 1620 BCE, the empire has grown not only in size, but in complexity. The coronation of Jedkonsu as sole pharaoh marks the end of an era, but also the beginning of a new one. He is no longer just a ruler of Egypt, but the architect of a truly international power. The question is no longer whether Egypt can expand. It is whether it can hold together what it has built. The reign of Pharaoh Jedkonsu ushers in the golden age of Egyptian imperial governance. Over 4 decades, he professionalizes the bureaucracy, creates a standing army with permanent garrisons across Canaan and Nubia, and formalizes a system of imperial client states. Major Canaanite cities like Hazor and Tyre become semi-autonomous allies, governed by local dynasts who answer directly to the pharaoh's appointed eyes and ears of the Nile, a class of elite Egyptian inspectors. Egyptian presence becomes normalized in the Levant. By 1600 BCE, Canaanite elites begin sending their sons to Waset, Thebes, for education. A Creole language develops along the eastern frontier, part Egyptian, part Semitic, which facilitates trade and administration. Egyptian-style temples, hybrid in design, rise in Gaza, Megiddo, and even Byblos. This Egypt does not merely extract tribute, it invests. Roads are built, granaries established, ports expanded. As a result, Egypt's influence becomes cultural as well as military. Egyptian cosmology spreads, and the idea of pharaoh as not just king but world stabilizer becomes an attractive model to other elites. In Mesopotamia, the rise of the Kassite dynasty in Babylon around 1595 BCE faces an unexpected challenge. Instead of turning their full attention to consolidating the Tigris-Euphrates region, the Kassites must navigate the growing Egyptian presence just to their west. To counterbalance Egypt's influence, Babylon accelerates its own diplomacy. Treaties are sought with Elam, Mari, and remnants of the Hurrian states. Trade caravans shift southward to avoid Egyptian-controlled Levantine ports, which now dominate the coastal economy. But the greatest threat is ideological. Egyptian imperial theology, centered on divine kingship and stability through order, challenges Babylonian models of kingship rooted in priesthood and civic bureaucracy. Egyptian-style monumental architecture begins appearing in northern Mesopotamian cities like Tutul and Emar, built by pro-Egyptian rulers hoping to curry favor. Babylon reacts by sponsoring religious reform. Marduk is elevated above other deities, echoing Egypt's earlier centralization under Amun. The result is a Mesopotamian cultural revival, but one increasingly shaped in contrast to Egyptian norms. Egypt's control of the Levantine coast pushes Minoan Crete into closer contact with the empire. By the 1580s BCE, Egyptian merchant fleets regularly dock at Knossos and Akrotiri. In return, Cretan luxury goods, pottery, saffron, bronze tools, flood Egyptian markets. Minoan frescoes begin depicting not just bulls and sea life, but pharaohs and lotus crowns. Cretan scribes begin experimenting with a script that blends Egyptian hieratic numerals with their own linear A system, a fusion that gives rise to linear C, a more expressive script used in both ceremonial and mercantile contexts. Meanwhile, the Mycenaean Greeks, still rising, watch with unease. Egyptian-backed Cretan naval strength delays their dominance of the Aegean by decades. Instead of immediately conquering the Cyclades, the Mycenaeans spend much of the 16th century BCE building fortresses inland and courting alliances with disaffected Anatolian cities. The Hittites, for their part, are forced into a two-front strategy. With Egypt controlling the southern coast and trading actively with Cyprus, the Hittites must delay their southern conquests and focus on consolidating central Anatolia. They develop a fierce cavalry force, built to match Egyptian chariots, and begin militarizing their frontiers in anticipation of future conflict. By 1550 BCE, a fragile balance of power has emerged. Egypt in the south, Babylon in the east, Hatti in the north, and Minoan Crete at sea. But Egypt remains first among equals, an unshakable superpower that has rewritten the rules of Bronze Age geopolitics. Egypt's early rise forces other powers to innovate or perish. This sparks an era historians might one day call the First International System. Trade routes become more formalized. Diplomatic marriages, once rare, become commonplace, with Egyptian princesses marrying Hittite and Canaanite princes. Royal courts exchange letters in Akkadian and Egyptian. By the end of the 16th century BCE, a great king's club has formed: Egypt, Babylon, Hatti, and possibly a powerful Knossos-Cyprus alliance. These powers begin negotiating peace, exchanging gifts, and carefully managing their influence over client states. In this world, Egypt doesn't just dominate, it stabilizes. Its wealth flows in not from war alone, but from control of trade, diplomacy, and ideas. It has become not only the greatest military power, but the keystone of a multipolar world. By 1500 BCE, Egypt no longer resembles the kingdom it once was. The twin crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt now rest atop a far larger dominion, one that stretches beyond the Nile Valley into the highlands of Nubia, the cedar coasts of Lebanon, the copper hills of Cyprus, and the palaces of Knossos and Mycenae. It is no longer just a nation, or even an empire. It is a system, a vast living network of temples, courts, granaries, and ports, and for the first time in human history, that system is stable. Under Pharaoh Djedkonsu II and his successors, Egypt evolves into the heart of a vast, interconnected world. Laws are written not only for Egyptians, but for vassals and allies across thousands of miles. Scribes trained in the schools of Wasit now record disputes in Hazor and Tyre. Inspectors from Memphis travel to Anatolia to settle boundary claims. Judges wear the pharaoh's seal alongside local regalia, bridging cultures by decree. Trade becomes standardized. Goods from Crete, tin from the Black Sea, incense from Arabia, all moving on roads and ships protected by the pharaoh's peace. Even the winds of the eastern Mediterranean begin to carry not just cargo, but order. And yet, the true mark of Egypt's dominion lies not in war or wealth, but in the stories people begin to tell. In cities from Mari to Pylos, from Carchemish to Ugarit, legends arise not of gods who create the world, but of pharaohs who keep it from falling apart. Pharaoh is not a name now. It is a role, a stabilizer, a caretaker of civilization itself. The age of collapse, the one that shattered so much of the ancient world in our history, never truly arrives. The sea peoples come, yes, as they did in our timeline, surging out of the Western Isles with fire and bronze. But they do not find divided city-states and crumbling palaces. They find a united front. Egyptian ships, crewed by Cretans and Tyrians, meet them at sea. Garrisoned ports in the Levant become firebreaks, not casualties. Egyptian marines land in Sardinia and Sicily to stamp out the threat at its source. What was, in our world, a cataclysm, becomes in this one a war won, and remembered in murals and stone as the Great Turning, when chaos was held back by discipline and the Nile saved the world. Even as war passes, change continues. Ironworking begins earlier, quietly, not as a desperate innovation, but as a state-sponsored project. Egyptian engineers, working with Hittite and Anatolian smiths, refine new forging techniques in well-guarded imperial foundries. Iron does not appear as the weapon of ruin, it appears as the next step in a civilization that never stopped climbing. By 1200 BCE, Egyptian influence is so pervasive that children in distant Canaan speak a hybrid tongue, part Egyptian, part local dialect. In Cyprus, the pharaoh's image is carved beside native deities. In Babylon, Marduk is not abolished, but embraced, reinterpreted as a brother of Amun. Priests of Thoth debate philosophy with scholars trained in Hurrian texts, and in a great observatory in Napata, high in the Nubian hills, astrologers track the stars not for omens, but for knowledge. They seek not to appease gods, but to understand their design. 1,000 years after the first stones were laid at Giza, the Egyptian world has become something unthinkable to the ancients, global. Not global in the modern sense, but in the Bronze Age's full extent. A world connected by scribes and sailors, where one state provides the rhythm for all others to move in harmony. The Phoenicians sail farther, the Mycenaeans build taller. Babylon endures, not in resistance, but in participation. Hatti flourishes as a regional partner rather than a rival. And through it all, Egypt does not dominate by conquest alone. It dominates through memory, through laws written in stone and papyrus, through roads that last, and institutions that teach. Even those who rebel do so in Egyptian fashion. Even those who resist the pharaoh do so with titles and language borrowed from his court. By 1000 BCE, the shape of history has changed. There is no Greek Dark Age, no Mycenaean collapse. The alphabet, born of scribes in Byblos under Egyptian rule, spreads faster and farther, carried by merchant fleets instead of desperate refugees. Temples still rise along the Nile, but now their stones echo stories from across the sea. Egypt has become not the last memory of a lost golden age, but the pillar of one that never ended.